In psychology, there is a term called the backfire effect. It is the study of how some react when confronted with strong arguments or even blatant facts that oppose a closely held belief. Instead of pausing to examine and reflect, some will dig their heels in even further and do or say whatever they can to defend that belief. The full extent of this tragedy is that millions are being led away from truth by those in this situation who have a public voice at the national and even international level. What has become even more apparent in the 21st century is simply this: truth matters. It has become increasingly clear to the reader what many well-known voices of Christianity have done to defend their faith, career, and/or ministry. To the average person who simply does not have the time to investigate information received from what is perceived as a trusted source, it is all too easy to take such teachings and research as honest, reliable, and an endorsement of one's belief system.
Ahab's 400 prophets all assured him that he would defeat Aram. But the prophet Micaiah tells him that these prophets are being enticed by a lying spirit sent by Yahweh himself. 1 Kings says, "So now Yahweh has put a deceiving spirit in the mouths of all these prophets of yours. Yahweh has decreed disaster for you." The Bible is saying Yahweh can make you say things. So Yahweh can also make people write things down.
So like a curious traveler on a quest, we embark upon a journey of information. Stay with us for a ride into knowledge.
Did the gospel authors put words on the lips of Jesus? Are the red letters accurate? Did they say Jesus said things in the Gospels that he never actually said? Did they put the words of Yahweh into the message of Jesus? You know there are verses in the Old Testament that say Yahweh will do it, and here's a few. Deuteronomy 18:18 says, "I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he will speak to them all that I command him." Jeremiah 1:9 and 10 says, "Then Yahweh put out his hand and touched my mouth. And Yahweh said to me, Behold, I have put my words in your mouth. See, I have set you this day over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to break down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant." And then you get the most Jewish of them all, the New Testament Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 4:4. But he answers and says, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Even Psalm 81:10 says, "Open wide your mouth, and I will fill it." The New Testament Gospels were written several decades after Jesus' death by anonymous people who lived in different parts of the Roman Empire. Even the titles of the Gospels. So where did they get their information about Jesus' life? The simple answer is the oral traditions, and now the lost documents, along with the creative imagination using Jewish midrash.
This brings us to the term pious fraud, also known as lying for Jesus. It is possible that the earliest preachers of Christianity propagated rather large tales that they themselves swallowed in a spirit of faith. In other words, they believed them to be true. Now, some actually argued and asked, if my falsehood enhances God's truthfulness and so increases his glory, why am I still condemned as a sinner? Lying for Jesus is a form of pious fraud that has happened and continues to happen. This is when it's believed that falsifying information is acceptable if that brings people to Jesus. That practice has a long history. It is common despite lying being frowned upon in the book they thumb. Martin Luther had a well-documented belief that reason is fate's greatest enemy. He said, what harm would it do if a man told a good strong lie for the sake of the good and for the Christian church? A lie out of necessity a useful lie, a helpful lie, such lies would not be against God, and God would accept them. However, John 14:6 says, never listen to a person who says it's okay to lie. That type of person is a manipulator with a warped mind who cannot be trusted. One of the worst forms of imaginary creation was the invention of sayings and whole speeches. And just as fiction writers do today, they put entire narratives in the mouths of the people they're writing about. Now, as an example, in the Gospel of John, chapters 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 are almost one continuous verbatim monologue. All 3,600 words of it, supposedly all uttered by Jesus. Now, this is truly a remarkable instance of total recall by the author, wouldn't you say? Eusebius is notoriously the author of a great many falsehoods, but then he does warn us in his famous history, because he said, we shall introduce into the history in general only those events which may be useful, first to ourselves and afterwards to posterity. The 5th and 6th centuries were a golden age of Christian forgery. In a moment of shocking candor, a bishop once said,
many things have been inserted by our ancestors in the speeches of our Lord, which, though put forth under his name, agree not with his faith, especially since, as already it has been often proved, these things were written not by Christ, nor by his apostles, but a long while after their assumption by I know not what sort of half-Jews, not even agreeing with themselves, who made up their tale out of reports and opinions merely, and yet fathering the whole upon the names of the apostles of the Lord, or on those who were supposed to follow the apostles, they maliciously pretended that they had written their lies and conceits according to them.
The church forgery mill did not limit itself to mere writings, but for centuries cranked out thousands of phony relics. And at one point, a number of churches claimed the one foreskin of Jesus. And there were enough splinters of the true cross that John Calvin said the amount of wood would make a full load for a good ship. Virtually all scholars of antiquity agree that Jesus of Nazareth existed in the 1st century Palestine, but scholars differ on the specific episodes described in the biblical accounts of Jesus. The Gospel of John we mentioned earlier does indeed have long, eloquent narratives, some 70-plus years after the fact. It contains a large number of instances where the Pharisees and others are portrayed as speaking in private or in council. However, the actual words they spoke are supposedly reported in the Gospel. And although we do not know the actual identity of the author, for convenience referred to as John, we can be sure that no disciple or follower of Jesus would have really heard what was being said if it was in private. But this narrative is able to tell everything about the private conversation. There is obviously literary creativity going on here. But your faith is a personal call, your call. Believe it as you want. Just more food for thought.
Thanks for watching this and all our videos. Please like, share, and subscribe. And until we meet again, stay curious, fellow travelers, and have a great day.